We all crave connection. It's part of being human, this longing to be seen, heard, and valued by others. But sometimes we find ourselves in relationships where we're the only ones reaching out. We text first, we call first, and we call first, and we wait. But there's a point when we begin to question, why am I always the one initiating, taking a step back in relationships, especially when you find yourself always the one reaching out, is one of the most empowering decisions you can make. It's about creating space for clarity and giving yourself permission to breathe and recenter. It's not about playing games or withdrawing out of anger. It's about reclaiming your own energy and mental peace. When we're in the habit of always calling, texting, or initiating contact, it can feel like we're doing all the work to keep the relationship alive. But relationships, whether they're friendships, romantic, or family connections, should never feel like a one-sided effort. They should feel reciprocal, like a dance between two people who are each taking turns leading and following. If only one person is ever leading, it's exhausting and unsustainable. By stepping back, you are giving the other person the opportunity to take responsibility for the relationship. It's like holding up a mirror. You stop reaching out and you let them see whether they value your presence enough to make the first move. This isn't about manipulating or testing the other person. It's about observing the dynamic that exists naturally between you both without your influence. When you stop initiating, you may feel some discomfort at first. It's human nature to want to stay in control, to make sure things are moving forward, to avoid the fear of being forgotten or ignored. But here's the truth. If the relationship is valuable, they will notice your absence and they will reach out. If they don't, then that's information. It tells you where you stand, and that clarity can be the gift you need to make an informed decision about how to proceed. Taking a step back also creates space for your own needs and desires to resurface. How many times have you neglected your own interests, hobbies, or self-care because you were too focused on maintaining contact with someone who wasn't equally invested? Stepping back gives you the breathing room to re-engage with yourself, your passions, your personal goals, your other relationships. By focusing on your own life, you reclaim your autonomy and recognize that your worth is not contingent on someone else's actions. But stepping back doesn't mean disappearing or cutting ties. It's about creating a healthy distance, a moment of pause, so that you can gain perspective. It's an invitation to slow down and listen to what the relationship really needs. When we're constantly chasing after someone or trying to keep communication flowing, it's easy to lose sight of whether the relationship is genuinely serving us or if we're just filling a space because we're afraid of being alone or feeling unimportant. This moment of stepping back can feel incredibly vulnerable. It's uncomfortable, and it challenges us to sit with the uncertainty of not knowing whether the other person will step up. But in that discomfort, we discover our own strength. We start to recognize that we don't have to chase after anyone to prove our value. The right people, the people who truly care, will make the effort on their own. And those who don't are simply revealing that they are not the right people for us, at least not in the way we might have hoped. Stepping back also teaches us the art of patience. In a world where we want everything now instant replies, constant attention, it can feel counterintuitive to stop reaching out. But sometimes the best way to show love is to let things unfold in their own time. If the other person values you, they'll make the effort to call or text. And if they don't, then you've learned something important about the relationship. In the end, taking a step back is an act of self-respect. It's about giving yourself the grace to let go of the need for constant reassurance and instead allowing yourself the space to let the relationship either thrive or naturally fade away. You are worthy of relationships where effort is mutual, where connection is not a one-sided pursuit. And in giving yourself the time and space to step back, you are affirming that your time, energy, and emotions deserve to be invested in relationships that bring balance, joy, and reciprocity.in relationships. It's easy to get caught up in the rush of emotions when things feel off or one-sided. If you're always the one reaching out and not receiving the same effort in return, the natural instinct is to react. You might feel hurt, frustrated, or even angry. But here's the thing, reaction, especially in the heat of emotion, can cloud our judgment and lead to decisions or behaviors we might later regret. Instead, what's needed in these moments is a practice of observation. When you choose to observe instead of react, you give yourself the space to fully see the situation for what it is, without jumping to conclusions or making assumptions. Instead of reacting with frustration or desperation, you choose to step back and watch. This doesn't mean you're passive or indifferent. It simply means you're giving yourself time to gather the information you need without being swept away by emotions or the need to fix the relationship immediately. Observation is an act of mindfulness. It's about tuning into the present moment, noticing the patterns and behaviors without judgment, and allowing those patterns to unfold naturally. When you stop reacting impulsively to someone's lack of initiative, you open yourself to a deeper understanding of the situation. You can ask yourself questions like, how does this person respond when I don't reach out? Do they make an effort to connect, or do they let the silence linger? What does this behavior tell me about how they value me or our relationship? These are questions that can only be answered when you're able to step back and observe with an open mind, free from emotional turbulence. One of the hardest parts of observation is resisting the urge to jump to conclusions. It's easy to assume that someone isn't reaching out because they don't care about us. But often the truth is more nuanced. Maybe they're going through something personal that makes them distant. Maybe they're not as aware of the imbalance in the relationship as we are. Or perhaps they simply don't prioritize the relationship in the same way we do, which is information we need, even though it's hard to accept. By observing, we can separate our emotions from the situation. If you find yourself reacting too quickly, whether that's sending an angry message or withdrawing completely without understanding the full picture, it's likely that your response is more about your feelings in the moment than it is about the actual state of the relationship. When we react from a place of hurt, we risk making decisions based on emotion rather than on clarity. And while emotions are important, they are not always reliable guides for decision making. Taking the time to observe allows you to respond thoughtfully instead of react impulsively. You can notice if the other person makes an effort when you pull back. Do they reach out after a few days? Do they ask why you haven't been in touch? Or do they seem indifferent? This is your opportunity to gather important information and assess whether this relationship is serving you the way you need it to. If they reach out and explain why they've been distant, it might reveal a temporary situation or personal struggle that you didn't know about. If they remain silent, it might be a sign that the dynamic between you needs to shift. Observation also helps you understand your own feelings better. Often when we're always chasing after someone, we don't give ourselves time to reflect on why it bothers us. Why does their silence feel so painful? Is it because we fear rejection, or because we're afraid of being unimportant? Or is it because we've invested a lot of ourselves into the relationship and the lack of effort from the other person feels like a betrayal? By observing without reacting, you can take a step back and ask yourself these deeper questions. You might discover that your frustration is not just about the other person's behavior, but also about your own need for validation or fear of abandonment. Another key element of observing without reacting is learning how to detach your sense of self-worth from the other person's behavior. If you're always reacting to someone else's actions, waiting for their call, texting them first, or feeling hurt when they don't reach out, it's easy to slip into the mindset that your value is tied to their attention. Observation helps you separate yourself from this dynamic. You begin to realize that you don't need constant reassurance or validation from others to know that you're worthy of love and respect. You are whole and complete on your own, and your worth doesn't fluctuate based on someone's behavior. Lastly, observing and not reacting teaches us patience. In today's fast-paced world, where instant gratification is the norm, it's hard to be patient. We want answers right away. But in relationships, the best decisions often come from a place of patience and stillness. By observing without reacting, you allow things to unfold in their own time, without rushing or forcing anything. Sometimes the best course of action is simply to wait and see how the other person responds when they realize you're no longer chasing them. Observation is not about being passive. It's about being active in your awareness. It's about being present with the situation without rushing to judgment or acting from a place of pain. When we stop reacting impulsively and instead observe with clarity, we put ourselves in a position to make thoughtful, informed decisions about how we want to move forward in the relationship. This practice gives us the power to understand the dynamics at play, protect our own well-being, and ultimately create space for healthier, more balanced connections. Investing in yourself is perhaps one of the most profound and transformative actions you can take, especially when you're in a relationship where your efforts are not being reciprocated. In a world that often encourages us to focus on others, whether through the demands of work, family, or friendships, it's easy to forget the importance of nurturing our own growth, well-being, and self-worth. But when we find ourselves in situations where we are consistently the ones reaching out, calling, texting, and trying to maintain connections that don't seem equally valued, it becomes essential to reorient our energy back toward ourselves. To invest in yourself means to prioritize your own needs, desires, and goals. It is an intentional act of self-respect and self-love. When you stop chasing after people who don't make the effort, you create space to nourish your own life. And that doesn't just mean focusing on your physical health or superficial self-care routines, though those are important too. It's about tending to your mental, emotional, and spiritual growth, becoming the best version of yourself without relying on. Emotional investment in yourself begins with understanding that your happiness and sense of fulfillment cannot be entirely dependent on someone else. It's a powerful shift to stop measuring your worth based on how others treat you. When we are always the ones reaching out, we often internalize that lack of response or effort as a reflection of our own inadequacy. We may start questioning, am I not interesting enough? Not lovable enough? The truth is, when we invest in ourselves, we understand that we are enough as we are. We don't need to chase after anyone's attention or approval. Taking time to nurture your emotional health means building the resilience to withstand disappointments without allowing them to define you. If the other person is not calling or texting first, instead of internalizing that as a personal failing, you can reframe it. Recognize that their actions or lack thereof are a reflection of them, not of your worth. This emotional boundary helps protect your sense of self. And by investing in your emotional well-being, you can build a stronger, more resilient inner foundation that doesn't depend on others for validation. When we are in relationships where we are constantly initiating and seeking connection, we often put our own passions and goals on the back burner. We may feel like we're too busy managing the other person's needs, or we may simply be so focused on trying to make the relationship work that we forget about our own desires. But investing in yourself means making time for the things that make you feel alive. It's about rediscovering what sets your soul on fire and putting energy into those things, whether they are creative pursuits, professional aspirations, or personal development. By focusing on your passions, you reignite a sense of purpose that doesn't rely on someone else's response. You take back control over your own trajectory, and you begin to see that your worth and happiness aren't dependent on someone else's effort to communicate. When you invest in your own growth, you can make strides in your career, explore new hobbies, or work on self-improvement, all of which enhance your sense of fulfillment. You start to realize that your life is already rich and meaningful, with or without the constant effort of others. Another vital aspect of investing in yourself is building and nurturing relationships that are reciprocal and supportive. We often get caught up in one relationship or connection that isn't fulfilling, to the detriment of other friendships and family bonds. When we stop reaching out to someone who isn't meeting us halfway, we create the space to reconnect with people who are genuinely interested in being part of our lives. It's an opportunity to rekindle old friendships, deepen connections with people who share your values, and spend more time with those who make you feel seen, heard, and valued. Building a strong, supportive social circle is an investment in your own happiness and emotional resilience. You deserve to have relationships where both people are giving and receiving equally, where mutual effort is not just expected but practiced. When you focus on these relationships, you start to see that there are others who are ready and willing to support you, celebrate your victories, and share in your struggles. You no longer have to chase after people who don't prioritize you, because you'll be surrounded by people who do. Investing in yourself also means making your physical and mental health a priority. When you're caught up in trying to maintain a one-sided relationship, it can take a toll on your overall well-being. Stress, Anxiety and emotional exhaustion can creep in, leaving you depleted. But when you shift your focus back onto yourself, you begin to recognize the importance of self-care. This might mean committing to a fitness routine that boosts your energy, getting enough rest to recharge your body, or engaging in mindfulness practices like meditation or journaling to clear your mind. Physical activity, healthy eating, and rest not only improve your mood and energy levels, but they also improve your ability to cope with challenges in all areas of life. When you invest in your health, you create a foundation of strength that will support you through life's ups and downs, including the emotional complexities of relationships. Mental health is just as important, so taking time to seek therapy, practice mindfulness, or engage in activities that nurture your mental well-being can help you process emotions in a healthier way, preventing the stress of one-sided relationships from negatively impacting your peace of mind. Finally, investing in yourself is about reclaiming your independence. One of the most powerful gifts we can give ourselves is the freedom to be fully who we are without relying on someone else for our sense of self. In relationships where we are always the one reaching out, there's a risk of losing sight of who we are as individuals. Our identity can become entwined with the other person's behavior, and we start to define ourselves by how much or how little they invest in us. When we take a step back and choose to invest in ourselves, we reconnect with our independence. We remember who we are outside of any relationship, our values, our dreams, our desires, and our personal strengths. We cultivate a sense of self-sufficiency that allows us to thrive on our own, knowing that while relationships are important, we are complete and whole in ourselves. Investing in yourself is not just an act of self-care, it's an act of self-respect. When you stop chasing after someone who isn't reaching out to you, you create the space to rediscover your own worth. You reclaim your time, your energy, and your focus. You build a life that is rich, fulfilling, and deeply meaningful, regardless of whether or not the other person makes the effort to reach out. By prioritizing your own growth, well-being, and happiness, you create a foundation that empowers you to make better decisions about the relationships you choose to invest in. Ultimately, the greatest gift you can give to yourself is the acknowledgement that you are worthy of love, effort, and connection. Without having to chase after IT. Setting boundaries and communicating them clearly is one of the most empowering and essential practices in any relationship, particularly when you find yourself always the one reaching out while the other person doesn't make the same effort. Boundaries are not about walls or isolation. They are about creating a space that honors your emotional, mental, and physical needs. They are an act of self-respect and self-care, a way of ensuring that you're not losing yourself in relationships that are one-sided or draining. And while setting boundaries can feel challenging, especially if you've been in the habit of constantly reaching out, it is also one of the most crucial steps in fostering healthy reciprocal relationships. Before you can communicate your boundaries, it's important to understand what they are. Boundaries are limits that we set to protect our well-being, whether that's emotional, mental, or physical. They define what is acceptable and what is not, and they help us navigate how we interact with others. Boundaries can be about how much time you're willing to invest in a relationship, how much emotional energy you're willing to give, or how much respect you expect in terms of communication and reciprocity. Without boundaries, we risk giving too much of ourselves to others and neglecting our own needs. Boundaries allow us to protect our energy and preserve our sense of self in relationships. When it comes to relationships where you are always the one initiating contact, whether it's calling, texting, or making plans, it's essential to set a boundary around how much effort you're willing to put in when it isn't being reciprocated. This boundary might look like choosing not to reach out unless the other person does, or it might involve being open and honest about how their lack of effort makes you feel. Whatever form it takes, setting this boundary is a powerful way to reclaim your own time and emotional energy. Once you've identified your boundaries, the next step is to communicate them clearly. This is often where people struggle, especially when they fear conflict or rejection. But the truth is, clear communication is an act of care for both yourself and the other person. When you communicate your boundaries, you are giving the other person the information they need to understand your needs and how they can engage with you in a way that feels respectful and balanced. It's important to remember that boundaries aren't demands or ultimatums, they're simply a statement of what you need to feel respected and cared for. For example, you might say, I've noticed that I'm always the one reaching out and it's starting to feel one-sided. I value our relationship, but I need a balance and effort. I'd like to feel that we are both investing in this connection. This kind of communication is direct but non-confrontational, and it allows the other person to understand your needs without feeling attacked or blamed. Setting boundaries also means being honest with yourself about what you're willing to tolerate. If you're constantly reaching out to someone who never reciprocates, it's important to ask yourself what this pattern is teaching you. Are you afraid of rejection? Do you fear losing the relationship? Are you afraid of being seen as too demanding or needy if you speak up? These are important questions to ask yourself because understanding your own hesitations will help you communicate your boundaries from a place of confidence rather than fear. The challenge of enforcing boundaries. Setting boundaries is one thing, but enforcing them is another. This is where the real work comes in. People often set boundaries and then backtrack or let them slide when the other person pushes against them. For example, if you've decided to stop initiating contact, you might feel a sense of guilt or anxiety when the other person doesn't reach out after a period of time. You may even be tempted to reach out again to test the waters or ease the discomfort. However, enforcing your boundaries means resisting the urge to give in to those feelings. It requires patience and the understanding that your boundaries are there for a reason to protect your emotional health and to ensure that the relationship is balanced. Enforcing your boundaries may also mean having to be consistent. If you've communicated that you need more mutual effort in the relationship and the other person continues to not meet you halfway, you might have to reassert your boundary and remind them of your needs. You can say, I've noticed that even after we talked about it, things haven't really changed. I need to know that you're also putting in effort if we're going to continue this relationship. Reasserting your boundaries isn't about being harsh or demanding, but rather being clear and firm in what you need in order to feel valued. There may also be situations where enforcing your boundaries means walking away from a relationship that isn't meeting your needs. Sometimes the other person will not respect your boundaries, and it's in these moments that you have to decide whether this relationship is worth continuing. It's a difficult decision, but sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. Letting go of relationships that don't honor your boundaries creates space for healthier, more fulfilling connections to enter your life. Boundaries and self-worth. Setting and communicating boundaries is not just about protecting your time or energy, it's about reinforcing your own self-worth. When you consistently allow yourself to be in one-sided relationships without speaking up, it can send a message to yourself that you're not worthy of respect or balanced effort. But when you set boundaries, you are actively affirming that your time, your energy, and your emotional well-being are valuable. You are telling yourself that you deserve relationships where your effort is met with equal effort and where your needs are acknowledged and respected. Boundaries are an expression of self-love. They are a way of telling the world, I am worthy of healthy, reciprocal relationships, and I am willing to do the work to create that. When you set and enforce your boundaries, you are protecting yourself from emotional burnout, resentment, and frustration, and you are cultivating a space for relationships that nourish and sustain you. How to set boundaries effectively. Setting boundaries can be uncomfortable, especially if you're not used to asserting your needs. But with practice, it becomes easier. Here are some steps to help you set and communicate your boundaries effectively. Get clear on your needs before you can communicate a boundary. You need to understand what you need. Spend some time reflecting on what you're feeling in the relationship and what's missing. Are you craving more effort, more communication, or simply more space? Communicate clearly and calmly when you talk to the other person. Try to avoid blaming or accusing language. Use I statements to express how you feel and what you need. For example, I feel unimportant when I'm always the one reaching out, and I would appreciate it if we both made an effort to keep in touch. Be consistent. Enforcing your boundaries requires consistency. If you've decided to stop initiating contact, stick to that decision even if you feel anxious or tempted to reach out. Consistency helps reinforce your boundaries and shows the other person that you're serious. Expect resistance. It's natural for the other person to feel uncomfortable or resistant when you set boundaries, especially if they are used to you always giving. Be prepared for this and stay firm in your resolve. It's okay for them to be uncomfortable as long as you're respecting your own needs. You know when to walk away. If your boundaries continue to be disrespected, you may need to reconsider the relationship. Walking away from relationships that don't honor your boundaries is not a failure, it's a reflection of your strength and self-respect. This conclusion. Setting boundaries and communicating them clearly is a vital part of maintaining healthy relationships. It's about respecting your own needs and ensuring that your relationships are mutually beneficial. By setting boundaries, you not only protect yourself from one-sided dynamics, but you also create the space for deeper, more fulfilling connections. You deserve relationships that honor your worth and where both people are equally invested. Setting clear boundaries is an act of self-love that allows you to create the life and relationships that support your growth, happiness, and well-being. In the end, the most important relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself. When you invest in yourself, set boundaries, communicate clearly, and honor your own needs, you create a life that is grounded in self-respect and self-love. You give yourself permission to stop chasing after people who don't make the effort, and instead you start attracting the relationships that are truly meant for you, those that are rooted in mutual respect, care, and balance. Remember, your worth is not determined by how much you give or how much others give to you. Your worth is intrinsic, already present in who you are. And when you stand firmly in that truth, you empower yourself to build the kind of relationships that honor and uplift you. So take a step back, observe without reacting, invest in your growth, set your boundaries, and communicate them with clarity. The right people will respect you for it. The right relationships will flourish in a space of mutual effort. And most importantly, you will live a life where you no longer have to chase anyone's attention because you'll be too busy investing in the most important relationship of all, the one you have with yourself. Thank you.